Sometimes animals know something terrifying long before humans do. Red emergency lights flashed across the primate wing of Redwood Wildlife Sanctuary as alarms echoed through the dark hallway just after 2 o'clock in the morning. Rain hammered against the massive glass panels surrounding the gorilla enclosure, while frantic footsteps pounded across the wet concrete floor. Inside the habitat, Kira, a 420-pound western lowland gorilla only days away from giving birth, let out another deep cry that sent chills through everyone nearby. The huge gorilla pressed herself against the back wall of the enclosure, breathing heavily as she wrapped both powerful arms tightly around her swollen belly. Sweat glistened across her black fur under the red flashing lights. "Her contractions are getting worse," shouted Maya Brooks, the sanctuary's senior keeper, as she gripped the railing with trembling hands. She should have delivered hours ago. Kira suddenly slammed one massive hand against the glass, causing 2 younger staff members to stumble backward in fear. But Maya didn't move. She had raised Kira since the gorilla was rescued as a baby nearly 18 years earlier. She knew every sound, every expression, every movement. And tonight, something felt horribly wrong. "She's scared," Maya whispered. "No," replied Dr. Ethan Cole as he rushed into the monitoring room, carrying a portable ultrasound scanner. "She's distressed. There's a difference." Ethan was one of the top exotic animal veterinarians in Northern California, and he had delivered dozens of gorilla babies during his career. But the second he looked through the observation glass at Kira, his confidence seemed to crack. The gorilla wasn't acting like a mother in labor. She wasn't preparing a nest. She wasn't positioning herself for birth. Instead, she kept dragging blankets and straw over her stomach while glancing repeatedly toward the ceiling vents above the enclosure. Then came another contraction. Kira cried out again and collapsed briefly onto her side before immediately pulling herself back up, shielding her belly with both arms. "We're losing time," Ethan said firmly. "If the baby's in distress, we may have to sedate her." Maya turned sharply toward him. "Sedate her? Ethan, look at her. She's trying to protect herself. Or she's panicking," Ethan replied. "And panic can kill both mother and baby." Another loud crash echoed through the enclosure as Kira overturned a large feeding barrel near the back wall. Staff members watching from the hallway jumped again as the gorilla began pacing rapidly in circles, breathing harder with every step. One young assistant named Liam Foster stared at the security monitors with growing unease. "Guys," he muttered softly, "has she been staring at that same vent all night?" Maya looked closer. He was right. Every few seconds, Kira's eyes snapped back toward the dark ventilation grate near the top corner of the habitat. The giant gorilla looked terrified of something nobody else could see. "Prepare the scanner," Ethan ordered. "Now." Minutes later, the sanctuary's medical team carefully entered the secondary containment area while Kira remained behind the safety barrier. The gorilla's chest rose and fell violently as Ethan slowly activated the portable ultrasound machine from outside the protected gate. "Easy, girl," Maya whispered gently. "We're trying to help you." For a brief moment, Kira looked directly at Maya. Her dark eyes shimmered with fear. Then she slowly lowered herself onto the floor without taking her eyes off the ceiling vent. Ethan pressed the scanner carefully against the reinforced access panel designed for protected medical exams. The blurry image flickered onto the monitor screen. A heartbeat appeared instantly. Strong. Healthy. The baby was alive. "See," Ethan said quietly. "The infant's stable." But then the image shifted. Ethan froze. His entire face drained of color as he leaned closer to the screen. "What is that?" he whispered. Maya stepped beside him. Liam stared over his shoulder. There, partially hidden beside the baby's position inside Kira's abdomen, was a long metallic shape reflecting brightly beneath the ultrasound signal. Ethan suddenly stumbled backwards so fast he nearly dropped the scanner. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Stop the delivery now." The entire medical room fell silent as the ultrasound monitor continued flickering beside Dr. Ethan Cole. Rain pounded harder against the sanctuary windows while the sound of Kira breathing echoed through the containment area. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The strange metallic object beside the baby gorilla was impossible to ignore now. Ethan slowly stepped closer to the screen again, his hands visibly shaking as he adjusted the scanner controls. "Zoom in," Maya whispered. Ethan swallowed hard before increasing the image resolution. The object became clearer by the second. Long, thin, artificial. It rested dangerously close to the infant gorilla inside Kira's womb. That is not surgical hardware, Ethan muttered quietly. Kira has never had abdominal surgery. Liam stared at the monitor with wide eyes. Could it be part of the enclosure somehow? No, Ethan answered immediately. Nothing could end up there naturally. Kira suddenly let out another deep cry from inside the habitat, instantly pulling everyone's attention back toward her. The giant gorilla remained curled protectively around her stomach, trembling with exhaustion. But even through the pain, her eyes stayed locked on the overhead ventilation grate. Maya slowly approached the glass. Kira, she whispered softly, placing one hand against the barrier. You knew something was wrong, did you not? To everyone's shock, Kira carefully lifted her head and crawled closer to Maya instead of retreating. The gorilla placed one massive hand gently against the opposite side of the glass and stared directly into Maya's eyes. Oh my God, Liam breathed. She is asking for help. Ethan looked down again at the ultrasound image, trying to think logically. If that object shifts during labor. He stopped speaking before finishing the sentence. Nobody needed the explanation. Another contraction hit Kira seconds later. She groaned deeply and leaned forward against the concrete floor, but instead of pushing naturally, she fought against her own body, tightening every muscle as if desperately trying to stop the birth from happening. Maya turned toward Ethan. She is not refusing because she is afraid, she said firmly. She is protecting the baby. Ethan ran one hand through his damp hair, clearly struggling with the realization. For nearly 12 hours, the staff had believed Kira was panicking from labor complications. But now the truth felt much darker. Kira had known something dangerous was inside her all along. We need another scan angle, Ethan said quickly. Now, Liam repositioned the portable monitor while Maya carefully distracted Kira with calming vocal cues she had used since the gorilla was young. Surprisingly, Kira obeyed every instruction the moment Maya spoke. She shifted slightly onto her side, breathing heavily, but staying calm enough for Ethan to continue the exam. The new angle revealed something even worse. The metallic object appeared embedded near the outer uterine wall, less than 2 inches from the baby. Ethan's face tightened immediately. That is impossible, he whispered again. There is no way this happened accidentally. Liam glanced nervously toward the security cameras mounted above the enclosure. You think somebody put that there? Before Ethan could answer, the sanctuary lights flickered briefly. Kira instantly panicked. She jumped backward with a loud bark of fear and pulled fresh straw over her stomach again. Her eyes snapped toward the same ceiling vent. Maya looked up slowly. Why does she keep watching that spot? She asked quietly. Liam moved toward the security station and rewound the overnight camera footage from earlier that evening. At first, everything looked normal. Kira pacing. Staff monitoring contractions. Rain outside. But then Liam froze the frame. Wait. Maya and Ethan rushed over beside him. On the grainy black and white footage, a tiny red dot briefly appeared near the vent above the enclosure before disappearing seconds later. Ethan stared at the screen in disbelief. That looks like a laser sight. The room went completely silent again. Then Maya slowly turned toward Kira, whose exhausted body still shielded her unborn baby from the room around her. She was never afraid of giving birth, Maya whispered. She was afraid of whoever did this to her. The storm outside Redwood Wildlife Sanctuary grew stronger as midnight slowly gave way to the early hours of the morning. Thunder rolled across the mountains surrounding the reserve, while security lights reflected off the rain-soaked pathways outside the primate wing. Inside the monitoring room, nobody could take their eyes off the frozen security footage displayed across the main screen. The faint red laser remained visible near the ceiling vent for less than 2 seconds before disappearing into darkness. But for Dr. Ethan Cole, that was more than enough. Replay it, he ordered quietly. Liam rewound the footage again. The laser appeared, vanished, then appeared once more slightly closer to Kira's enclosure. Maya folded her arms tightly across her chest. Somebody was aiming into the habitat. Ethan nodded slowly without speaking. His mind raced through possibilities he did not want to believe. Redwood Wildlife Sanctuary was one of the most respected conservation centers in the country. The gorilla habitat alone had multiple layers of security, reinforced barriers, and motion detection systems. Nobody should have been able to get close enough to target Kira without triggering alarms. Yet somehow, something had entered the enclosure area without anyone noticing. A loud crash suddenly echoed through the room. Everyone spun around toward the observation window. Kira had overturned another feeding container and backed herself into the farthest corner of the habitat. Her breathing had become faster now, more desperate. She pulled armfuls of straw and blankets around her stomach while keeping her terrified eyes locked on the ventilation grate overhead. "She thinks it is coming back," Maya whispered. Another contraction hit moments later. Kira cried out and grabbed the steel bars beside her with enormous strength, but once again she resisted pushing. Every instinct in her body seemed focused on protecting the baby instead of delivering it. Ethan stared at her carefully. The more he watched, the more horrifying the truth became. Kira had recognized danger before any human in the building did. "Check the exterior maintenance access points," Ethan told Liam. "Now." Liam immediately hurried from the room while Maya slowly sat down beside the glass. "Hey, girl," she whispered softly. Toward Kira. "You are safe. We are here." Kira looked at Maya for several long seconds. Then, in an almost human gesture, the gorilla slowly shook her head. Maya froze. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Ethan frowned. "See what?" She understood me. Ethan wanted to dismiss the idea, but deep down he knew Maya was right. Kira was not acting irrationally. She was communicating. Minutes later, Liam rushed back into the room holding a flashlight and a damp maintenance keycard. The North Service hallway door was unlocked, he said breathlessly. "And somebody disabled one of the exterior cameras around 11:40 tonight." Ethan's stomach dropped. "You are certain?" Liam nodded quickly. "The footage cuts out for almost 7 minutes." Maya slowly stood up. That was right before Kira started panicking. Another terrifying realization settled over the room. Whatever happened inside the habitat had happened recently. Very recently. Ethan grabbed the radio clipped to his belt. "Call sanctuary security and local law enforcement," he said firmly. "Nobody enters or leaves this property until we understand what is going on." Kira suddenly released another painful cry that echoed throughout the primate wing. Maya turned instantly toward the enclosure. The gorilla had collapsed briefly onto her knees before forcing herself back upright again. Sweat covered her fur as exhaustion clearly overwhelmed her body. She could not hold off labor much longer. Ethan looked back at the ultrasound image still glowing on the monitor beside him. The metallic object remained dangerously close to the baby. If contractions intensified naturally, even a small movement could create catastrophic complications for both mother and infant. "We may have to operate," Ethan admitted quietly. Maya looked horrified. "Tonight, we may not have a choice." Before Maya could answer, the sanctuary lights flickered again. This time Kira screamed immediately and threw herself protectively over her stomach. At that exact moment, Liam noticed something moving on the security monitor near the outside maintenance corridor. A shadowy figure wearing a hooded rain jacket crossed briefly through the camera frame before disappearing into the storm. Liam pointed at the screen in panic. "Somebody is still here." The image of the hooded figure lingered on the security monitor as thunder rattled the sanctuary windows hard enough to shake the metal frames. Liam zoomed in on the blurry footage, but the heavy rain outside distorted every detail. All they could make out was a tall person moving quickly through the maintenance corridor before disappearing into the darkness near the primate wing. "Can you enhance it?" Maya asked urgently. Liam shook his head. "The storm interference is too strong." Dr. Ethan Cole stared at the screen with growing frustration. Every second mattered now. Kira's labor was progressing whether they were ready or not, and somewhere on the property there might still be a person connected to whatever had been placed inside her body. Another painful groan echoed through the enclosure behind them. Maya rushed toward the observation glass again, while Ethan checked the medical monitor beside the ultrasound station. Kira's contractions were now less than 4 minutes apart. "She cannot hold on much longer," Ethan admitted quietly. Kira paced in tight circles across the habitat floor, her massive arms wrapped protectively around her belly. Every time lightning flashed outside, her eyes darted back toward the overhead vent and then toward the dark hallway beyond the containment door. It was almost as if she expected someone to walk back in at any moment. "She knows she is being hunted," Maya whispered. Ethan remained silent for several seconds before finally saying something that surprised everyone in the room. Maybe she has known for days. Maya turned toward him immediately. Ethan pointed toward the medical records scattered across the counter nearby. Think about it. The appetite changes. The pacing. Refusing to sleep. Staying near the corners of the enclosure instead of the center. We thought it was anxiety from late pregnancy. But it started before labor, Maya finished softly. Ethan nodded grimly. Much earlier. Liam suddenly looked up from the computer terminal. Doctor, there is something else. He pulled up another set of archived surveillance footage from 3 nights earlier. The timestamp showed nearly midnight. Kira was resting quietly in the enclosure until the habitat lights dimmed automatically for overnight mode. Then, within seconds, the gorilla abruptly sat upright and stared toward the same vent. A faint red dot briefly crossed the concrete floor beside her. Kira instantly grabbed her stomach and retreated backward into the shadows. Maya covered her mouth in shock. She saw it before anyone else did. Ethan leaned closer to the screen. Replay that again. Liam replayed the footage slowly frame by frame. This time they noticed something even stranger. Just before the red dot disappeared, Kira looked directly toward one of the hidden service hallways behind the enclosure walls. She was not confused. She was tracking movement. She knew somebody was there, Maya whispered. Another contraction hit Kira hard enough to force her onto one knee. She let out a strained cry before immediately shielding her belly again with both arms. Ethan looked away from the monitor toward the exhausted gorilla. She has been trying to protect that baby for days. Suddenly, the sanctuary intercom crackled loudly overhead. Security team to North Maintenance Wing immediately, a voice announced. Possible unauthorized access confirmed. Liam's face turned pale. They found someone. Ethan grabbed his radio instantly. Status report. Static filled the speaker for several tense seconds before a guard finally answered. A maintenance cart was discovered near the exterior utility tunnel behind the primate building. No driver. Fresh footprints in the mud heading toward the old storage sheds. Maya looked horrified. They are still on the property. Before anyone could respond, the lights inside the gorilla habitat suddenly shut off completely. The entire enclosure dropped into darkness. Kira screamed immediately. Alarms began blaring across the sanctuary as backup generators struggled to activate. Power failure, Liam shouted. Emergency red lights flickered dimly back to life seconds later, casting long shadows across the enclosure walls. But something inside the habitat had changed. Kira was no longer near the back corner. She now stood directly beneath the overhead vent, staring upward with terrifying focus while clutching her stomach tightly. Then a faint metallic sound echoed from somewhere above the ceiling panels. Ethan felt his blood run cold. Everybody step back from the enclosure, he ordered quietly. Now, the metallic sound above the enclosure came again, louder this time, scraping softly through the ventilation shaft, like something shifting in the darkness. Every person inside the monitoring room froze instantly. The emergency backup lights painted the habitat in a dim red glow while rain continued slamming against the sanctuary roof overhead. Kira remained directly beneath the vent, breathing heavily as she stared upward without blinking. Her entire body trembled with exhaustion, yet she refused to move away from that spot. There is somebody up there, Liam whispered. Dr. Ethan Cole slowly motioned everyone backward from the observation glass. Nobody opens that enclosure, he said firmly. Not until security clears the ceiling access points. Maya could barely take her eyes off Kira. The gorilla looked terrified, but beneath the fear there was something else now. Determination. Every instinct in her body seemed focused on shielding the unborn baby no matter what happened to her. Another contraction struck suddenly. Kira groaned deeply and lowered herself onto one knee before grabbing the steel support column beside her. Sweat glistened across her fur as she fought against the pain again instead of pushing naturally. Ethan checked the fetal monitor beside the ultrasound equipment. The baby's heartbeat remained stable for now, but Kira's condition was worsening rapidly. She cannot delay labor much longer, he warned quietly. Maya nodded nervously. Then we need to get her out of here. Before Ethan could answer, a loud banging noise echoed somewhere above the ceiling panels. Kira instantly roared and backed away from the vent while clutching her stomach tightly. Liam jumped toward the hallway door. Security should be here by now. Suddenly the radio on Ethan's belt crackled alive. "Dr. Cole," a guard's voice shouted through heavy static. "We found signs of forced entry near the rooftop ventilation system. Repeat, somebody accessed the primate wing from above." Maya felt her stomach twist. They were watching her from the ceiling. Ethan grabbed the radio tightly. "Is the suspect in custody?" "Negative. We lost visual during the power outage." Kira cried out again from inside the habitat, but this time the sound was different. Weaker. Maya immediately noticed blood pressure numbers dropping on the nearby monitor. "Ethan," she whispered. Ethan looked at the screen, and his expression darkened instantly. "Her stress levels are spiking dangerously." Another low metallic clink echoed from above. Everyone looked upward again. Then came the unmistakable sound of slow footsteps moving through the ventilation shaft directly over the enclosure ceiling. Liam's face turned pale. "Oh my God." Kira began backing toward the rear wall, dragging blankets beneath her as though desperately trying to hide the baby from whatever remained above her. Maya stepped closer to the glass despite Ethan's warning. "Kira," she said softly, "listen to me. We are going to protect you." For the first time all night, the gorilla briefly took her eyes off the ceiling and looked directly at Maya again. Her expression seemed almost human, desperate, pleading. Then the habitat lights flickered one more time. A small object suddenly slipped through the ventilation grate overhead and landed softly on the enclosure floor near Kira. Everyone gasped. Ethan immediately grabbed the emergency flashlight and aimed it through the glass. The object was a small black electronic device no larger than a cell phone. A blinking green light flashed across its surface. "What is that?" Liam whispered. Ethan's face tightened with alarm. "Move her away from it. Now." But before anyone could react, Kira shocked everyone. Instead of retreating, the exhausted gorilla lunged forward and quickly covered the object with a pile of straw and blankets, hiding it completely from view. Then she positioned her body directly over it while wrapping both arms around her stomach protectively. Maya stared in disbelief. "She knows what it is." Ethan looked horrified. "No," he said quietly. "She knows who left it." At that exact moment, sanctuary security officers burst into the monitoring room carrying flashlights and rain-soaked jackets. "We found fresh footprints on the roof," one guard announced breathlessly. "Whoever was up there escaped into the forest behind the reserve." Ethan pointed immediately toward the enclosure. "Forget the roof. We have a pregnant gorilla protecting evidence inside that habitat." The guard turned toward Kira just as another contraction hit her harder than before. Kira cried out loudly and nearly collapsed against the wall, breathing faster with every second. Ethan stared at the monitor again. The baby's heartbeat was beginning to fluctuate for the very first time. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "We are running out of time." The baby gorilla's heartbeat echoed unevenly through the monitoring room as red emergency lights continued flashing across the walls of Redwood Wildlife Sanctuary. Every person inside the primate wing understood the terrifying truth now. Kira had not been acting irrationally. She had been trying to protect her unborn child from something hidden inside the enclosure and from someone who still might be nearby. Dr. Ethan Cole stared at the medical monitor while sweat rolled down the side of his face. "The infant's oxygen levels are dropping," he warned quietly. "If we wait too long, we could lose them both." Maya Brooks looked torn between fear and heartbreak as she watched Kira lying protectively over the hidden electronic device beneath the straw. The exhausted gorilla barely had enough strength left to stay upright, yet she still refused to move away from the object. "She thinks it is important," Maya whispered. "Maybe it is evidence," one of the security officers replied. Ethan shook his head immediately. "I do not care about evidence right now. I care about saving that baby." Another painful contraction hit Kira moments later. She cried out and pressed herself harder against the concrete floor while wrapping both arms around her stomach. The fetal monitor beeped faster, then slower. Ethan looked back at the ultrasound images frozen on the screen beside him. The metallic object inside Kira remained, dangerously close to the infant. Every contraction increased the risk. "We cannot do natural delivery anymore," he said firmly. "We have to perform emergency surgery." Maya's eyes widened. "Inside the enclosure? It is the only option." One of the guards stepped forward. "Doctor, we still do not know if the suspect is armed." Ethan turned sharply toward him. "And we do not know if that device under Kira contains tracking software," recording equipment, or something worse. But if we wait another hour, none of that will matter. Kira suddenly lifted her head and looked directly toward Maya again. Her dark eyes appeared exhausted beyond words. Then, incredibly, she slowly moved one hand away from the pile of straw covering the device and pressed her palm gently against her own chest. Maya's breathing caught instantly. "Ethan," she whispered. "I think she trusts us now." Ethan stared at Kira silently for several seconds before nodding once. "Prepare the surgical suite." The next 20 minutes passed in complete chaos. Security teams sealed every exit around the sanctuary while medical staff rushed equipment into the protected veterinary operating room beside the enclosure. Heavy rain still pounded the roof overhead, and every loud crack of thunder made Kira flinch nervously. Yet despite her fear, she followed Maya calmly toward the transfer gate connecting the habitat to the medical area. "Easy, girl," Maya whispered softly as Kira stepped slowly through the reinforced corridor. "You are doing great." Liam stood near the control panel watching in disbelief. "She is cooperating completely," Ethan answered quietly without looking away from Kira. "Because she knows we finally understand." Once inside the operating suite, Kira lowered herself carefully onto the padded floor while veterinarians prepared the anesthesia equipment nearby. The electronic device remained hidden beneath the blankets she carried with her from the enclosure. Nobody had forced her to leave it behind. Maya knelt beside the reinforced barrier separating staff from the surgical area. "You kept your baby alive all night," she whispered emotionally. "You protected him." Kira looked directly at Maya again and released a low, exhausted rumble that sounded almost like relief. Then Ethan noticed something alarming on the fetal monitor. The baby's heartbeat suddenly dropped sharply for several terrifying seconds. "We are out of time," he said immediately. Medical staff moved quickly into position as anesthesia gas slowly entered the protected chamber. Kira fought the mask at first, panicking briefly as another contraction hit her body. But Maya remained beside the barrier, speaking softly the entire time. "You are safe now," she repeated gently. "Nobody is taking your baby." Slowly, Kira calmed down. Her breathing weakened as the medication began taking effect. Just before her eyes closed completely, she reached one massive hand toward Maya through the protective gap in the barrier. Maya pressed her own trembling hand against the other side. Then Kira finally allowed herself to rest. Ethan took a deep breath and turned toward the operating table. "Let us save this family." The operating room inside Redwood Wildlife Sanctuary felt unnaturally quiet except for the steady rhythm of medical monitors and the sound of rain hammering against the roof above. Kira lay peacefully under anesthesia inside the protected surgical suite while doctors and veterinary staff moved carefully around her enormous body. Maya Brooks stood behind the reinforced viewing barrier with both hands pressed tightly against the glass, unable to look away from the gorilla she had cared for nearly her entire adult life. Dr. Ethan Cole leaned over the ultrasound monitor one final time before beginning the operation. The baby's heartbeat remained weak but stable. "Barely. We have one chance to do this safely," he said quietly to the team. Everybody stays calm. The room nodded in silence. Even the security officers watching nearby seemed shaken by everything that had happened during the night. Liam remained at the computer station reviewing sanctuary camera feeds, while technicians carefully examined the strange electronic device Kira had protected so desperately. "Doctor," Liam suddenly called out. "You need to see this." Ethan glanced toward the monitor while continuing preparations. Liam enlarged. An image from the device's internal memory system. Several hidden files appeared on the screen. Maps of the sanctuary, veterinary schedules, breeding records, and then something even worse. "That is impossible," Maya whispered. One document listed the estimated due date for Kira's baby along with transportation codes and overseas shipping contacts. Ethan stared at the screen in disbelief. Somebody planned to steal the infant after birth. The room fell silent again. Maya slowly looked back toward the unconscious gorilla lying on the surgical platform. Tears filled her eyes instantly. She knew, she whispered emotionally. She knew her baby was in danger this entire time. Ethan lowered his head for a moment, visibly overwhelmed by guilt. All night they had believed Kira was unstable, aggressive, difficult. But in reality, the gorilla had been doing exactly what any terrified mother would do, protecting her child. Another alarm suddenly beeped sharply beside the monitor. Ethan snapped back toward the operating table immediately. Heart rate is dropping again. We begin now. The next several minutes felt endless. Maya could not breathe properly as Ethan and the veterinary surgeons worked carefully around Kira's abdomen while nurses monitored the infant's heartbeat every second. Outside, thunder continued rolling through the valley while emergency lights flashed across the sanctuary grounds. Security teams still searched the property for the unknown intruder, but inside the operating room, nothing mattered except saving the baby Kira had fought so hard to protect. Then suddenly, one of the nurses gasped softly. "I see movement." Ethan carefully lifted the newborn infant free moments later. For one terrifying second, the entire room froze. The baby gorilla remained completely still in Ethan's arms. Maya's heart nearly stopped. "Come on," Ethan whispered desperately. "Come on, little guy." Then finally, the newborn released a tiny cry into the room. Everyone exhaled at once. Maya covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Oh, thank God. The infant moved weakly but steadily while veterinary staff wrapped him carefully in warm blankets. Ethan looked, exhausted with relief as he listened to the baby's strengthening heartbeat through the monitor. "He is alive," he whispered. But the emotional moment lasted only seconds before Ethan noticed something else inside the surgical field. Wait. His expression changed immediately. There it is. Carefully, Ethan removed the metallic object they had seen on the ultrasound earlier that night. Once cleaned, the horrifying truth became obvious. It was not random debris. It was a tracking implant attached to a small dart fragment designed for long-range tranquilizer systems. Maya stared at it in disbelief. "Someone shot her." Ethan nodded grimly. "Recently." Liam looked sick as he stepped closer to the glass. "That means whoever targeted Kira was planning this for weeks." Maya turned slowly toward the sleeping gorilla whose exhausted body remained completely still beneath the operating lights. "And she carried all of this alone," she whispered. Ethan gently handed the healthy newborn to one of the nurses before stepping toward Maya at the barrier. His voice cracked slightly with emotion. "We failed her," he admitted quietly. "She trusted us to protect her baby, and instead she had to protect him herself." Maya looked through the glass at Kira and the tiny infant beside her. "Not anymore," she whispered softly. "She is not alone anymore." Morning slowly arrived over Redwood Wildlife Sanctuary as the storm finally began to weaken outside. Pale gray sunlight filtered through the clouds and spilled across the soaked pathways surrounding the primate wing. Inside the veterinary recovery room, the tension that had consumed the sanctuary all night slowly gave way to exhausted relief. Kira remained asleep under close observation while her newborn son rested safely inside a temperature-controlled infant enclosure only a few feet away. The tiny gorilla had already grown stronger over the past hour. His breathing had stabilized. His heartbeat sounded steady and healthy. Every member of the medical staff seemed emotionally drained after what they had witnessed. Maya Brooks sat quietly beside the recovery barrier wrapped in a blanket someone had given her earlier, though she barely noticed it. She had not left Kira's side once. Across the room, Liam continued working with sanctuary security and local detectives who had arrived shortly before sunrise. The hidden files recovered from the electronic device revealed something deeply disturbing. A private exotic animal trafficking network had been monitoring several sanctuaries across the country for years, specifically targeting newborn endangered primates for illegal international sales. Redwood Wildlife Sanctuary had unknowingly become one of their newest targets. They had inside information, Liam explained quietly as he showed Ethan additional files from the recovered device. Feeding schedules, medical records, camera blind spots. Somebody help them. Ethan looked exhausted as he leaned against the counter nearby. "Have they identified who?" Liam nodded grimly. One of the overnight maintenance contractors disappeared during the storm. Police found his vehicle abandoned near the forest road about 2 miles from here. Maya closed her eyes briefly, trying to process everything. The betrayal felt unbearable. Kira had trusted the sanctuary her entire life, yet somehow danger had slipped directly into her home. And still, despite everything, the gorilla had protected her baby without hurting anyone around her. "She understood more than we ever realized," Maya whispered softly. Ethan looked toward Kira through the recovery glass. I think she understood everything. Just then, one of the nurses monitoring the infant smiled suddenly. "Doctor," she said gently. "He is waking up." Maya stood immediately and walked closer to the small enclosure beside the operating area. The baby gorilla slowly opened his eyes for the first time, tiny fingers curling weakly against the warm blanket around him. Even Ethan smiled despite the exhaustion on his face. "He looks strong," Maya whispered emotionally. But at that exact moment, another sound filled the recovery room. A soft, low rumble. Everyone turned instantly toward Kira. The gorilla's eyes were opening slowly. Maya's heart raced as she hurried toward the barrier beside her. "Hey, girl," she whispered softly. "You did it." Kira blinked several times. Still groggy from anesthesia? Then almost immediately, she looked around the room searching for something. Or someone. Ethan nodded toward the nurse, carefully holding the infant nearby. "Bring him closer." The nurse approached slowly while Maya stayed beside the barrier, speaking calmly to Kira the entire time. The moment the baby made a tiny sound, Kira reacted instantly. Her tired eyes widened with recognition. A deep, emotional rumble vibrated from her chest as she slowly reached both arms forward. Maya could not stop crying anymore. "She knows he is safe," she whispered. The nurse carefully placed the newborn beside Kira within the protected recovery area. For a brief second, the entire room seemed to stop breathing. Then Kira gently pulled the infant against her chest with extraordinary tenderness. The baby immediately relaxed against his mother's fur while Kira wrapped one enormous arm around him protectively. Ethan quietly wiped tears from his own eyes as he watched the reunion. Nobody spoke for several moments. They simply watched the exhausted mother hold the child she had fought all night to protect. Then something happened that none of them would ever forget. Kira slowly lifted her eyes toward Maya, standing outside the barrier. And with the baby still resting safely in her arms, the gorilla gave a small, gentle nod. Not fear, not warning, gratitude. Maya broke down completely at the sight. "You were trying to tell us the whole time," she whispered through tears. Kira lowered her head beside her newborn son and finally, for the very first time all night, closed her eyes peacefully. 3 months later, Redwood Wildlife Sanctuary looked completely different. New security systems surrounded the primate wing. Additional cameras covered every hallway, rooftop access point, and maintenance corridor across the property. The sanctuary had become the center of national attention after investigators uncovered the illegal trafficking network connected to endangered animals around the country. Several arrests had already been made, including individuals who secretly provided private sanctuary information to wildlife smugglers for years. But inside the gorilla habitat, none of that seemed to matter anymore. Peace had finally returned. Warm afternoon sunlight poured across the grass-covered enclosure as visitors gathered quietly behind the observation glass, hoping to catch a glimpse of the sanctuary's newest resident. Children pressed their hands against the barrier while parents whispered softly beside them. Even months later, the story of the mother gorilla who protected her baby before anyone else realized danger was coming had spread across the entire country. Near the center of the habitat, Kira sat calmly beneath the shade of a large oak structure with her infant son resting safely against her chest. The tiny gorilla had grown stronger every week. His fur had darkened, his movements had become playful and energetic, and he rarely left his mother's side for more than a few seconds. Maya Brooks leaned quietly against the observation railing nearby, holding a cup of coffee, while Dr. Ethan Cole reviewed one of the baby's latest health reports. 8 pounds already, Ethan said with a tired smile. "He is growing faster than expected." Maya laughed softly, just like his mother. Inside the enclosure, the baby gorilla suddenly climbed clumsily onto Kira's shoulder before nearly tumbling backward into the grass. Several visitors gasped nervously, but Kira calmly reached out one enormous hand and gently pulled him back against her chest without even looking. Maya shook her head in amazement. She never stops watching him. Ethan closed the medical file slowly. "After everything she went through, I do not think she ever will." For a moment, both of them stood quietly watching the pair together. It still felt impossible to believe how close they had come to losing them both that night. Ethan often replayed the memory in his mind. The fear in Kira's eyes, the ultrasound image, the way she had fought her own labor simply to keep her baby alive. He had spent most of his career studying animal behavior, but nothing had prepared him for the emotional intelligence he witnessed in that gorilla mother. "I owe her an apology," Ethan admitted quietly. Maya glanced toward him. "You saved her life." Ethan shook his head slowly. "No, she saved her baby's life. We just finally listened." At that exact moment, the baby gorilla noticed Maya standing near the glass and let out an excited chirping sound before bouncing awkwardly toward the front of the enclosure. Kira followed immediately behind him, staying close enough to protect him but allowing him enough freedom to explore. The little gorilla pressed both tiny hands against the observation glass while visitors smiled and laughed around him. Then Kira approached slowly from behind. The enormous gorilla stopped directly in front of Maya and looked at her through the glass for several long seconds. Maya smiled softly. "Hey, beautiful girl." Kira lowered herself carefully onto the ground while the baby climbed into her lap again. The sanctuary visitors watched in complete silence as the gorilla wrapped both arms around her child and gently rested her chin against the top of his head. It was such a deeply human moment that several people nearby quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Ethan stood beside Maya watching the scene unfold. Then he noticed something mounted beside the enclosure entrance that had been installed earlier that morning. A small bronze plaque reflected brightly beneath the afternoon sunlight. Maya walked over and read the words aloud softly. "A mother understood the danger long before we did. Her courage saved a life." Ethan stared back toward Kira holding her son peacefully beneath the trees. After everything that had happened, there was only one truth left that nobody inside Redwood Wildlife Sanctuary would ever forget. Sometimes the purest form of love does not come from words at all. Sometimes it comes from a mother willing to endure fear, pain, and danger simply to protect her child. And on the night nobody believed her, one gorilla mother proved that instinct, love, and courage could speak louder than any human voice ever could.